including on the first day of your presidency, is becoming, through the efforts made by Ukraine and its Western backers, into a Groundhog Day of sorts. It's as if yesterday the representative of Kiev was not sitting in the same chair and didn't try to put forward the talking points of Ukrainian propaganda about the bloodthirsty Russia in its plans to subjugate the neighboring country, and as if the European sponsors of the regime was not reading through their talking points about how Moscow is not ready for peace. Their senseless mantras about how Moscow is not ready for peace. Colleagues, why couldn't we discuss the topic of the meeting yesterday? Especially since the tragedy in Kiev, which is being mentioned in the letter sent by the Ukrainian PR, happened in the early hours of the 31st of July. The Ukrainian representative yesterday essentially voiced her version of what happened, as predictable as it was. Does the Council accept such an inept waste of its time and resources on other issues on its agenda? Imagine that we had had a situation on the country situation and then decided that we had forgotten to discuss one aspect and then reconvened on the next day to discuss that. We think that such an approach of the Western sponsors of the Kiev regime is irresponsible, unacceptable, and seriously undermining the credibility of the Council and its ability to tackle with indeed urgent crises. And they have the temerity of accusing my country of wasting the working time of Security Council members. Furthermore, when they condone the attempts of the Kiev regime to separate the discussions of the Ukrainian crisis into right discussions and wrong discussions, the Western delegations do show the very same wish to undermine the efforts for peace in Ukraine, which we describe in our statements, including my statements yesterday. Mr. President, if we go back to the formal reason for the convening of the meeting today, well, in the early hours of the 31st of July, the armed forces of Russia, pursuing the goal of demilitarizing Ukraine, did indeed deliver a group strike using a long-range, high-precision weapons and UAVs on military-industrial facilities of Ukraine, including a military airfield, ammunition depots, stocks of missiles, and UAV components. All of the intended military targets were hit. And let me underscore once again, we're talking about objects which are related to the Ukraine military potential. And this was confirmed by the videos by Ukrainian users in social networks, which show very clearly the secondary explosion of ammunitions at the objects we hit, some of which were deployed in civilian sector in violation of the IHL. On the other hand, our armed forces, as was the case before, were acting in strict compliance with international humanitarian law and were not targeting civilian objects. When it comes to striking the residential building in Kiev and the deaths of civilians, well, the military experts who analyze the videos which exist concurred on the only reason for the tragedy, as was the case previously as well. The reason is the criminal deployment of the Ukrainian air defense in dense urban areas and the unskilled way of guiding them. During this special military operation, we have received numerous confirmation of the fact that Ukrainian air defense missiles are the main danger for the civilians of this country, and the Ukrainians know that very much, and they openly comment on this. If the armed forces of Ukraine did comply with the IHL, then we would have been able to avoid such tragedies. And the civilian population of Ukraine is not suffering from direct Russian strikes. But the expired princeling in Kiev is not interested in easing the plight and suffering of his civilians, but rather in presenting such situations provoked by him into present them as intentional Russian strikes. His only goal here is to save his own hide and convince his sponsors to continue financial and military support to his agonizing dictatorial and corrupt regime. The abuse of the Security Council meetings so as to shift the responsibility for the death of his own citizens is a favorite trick of Ukrainian state propaganda. It is not a coincidence, and many have noted that the most high-impact tragedies miraculously coincide with the eve or the time of the visit of the Kiev clique abroad, when he needs to get the pity from yet another country or cage another tranche of military or financial assistance. What's left outside here is the fact that the Ukrainians themselves launch several hundreds of UAVs against our country daily, intentionally trying to strike civilian objects in their futile attempts to sow panic and undermine the stability of my country. Last week alone, as a result of that, 155 civilians were injured, two-thirds of them because of drone strikes. The highest number of victims were in Belgorod, Kherson, Zaporozhye Oblast, and the Krasnodar region. The Ukrainians are deliberately targeting the places where civilians are congregate, residential buildings, public transport, and emergency services. For example, as a result of a UAV strike against an ambulance in the Pologo region in Zaporozhye Oblast, the driver of the ambulance died, and the paramedic and the nurse there were injured. In Golopristan district of Kherson Oblast, 3 civilians died and 5 were injured because of a drone attack on a civilian bus. All of these facts are carefully ignored by Kiev and his backers, as we have been able to see very well today. And what is being done by secretariat staff or from relevant agencies is also disingenuous, because they pretend they don't know nothing about this, or they say that it's impossible to verify the information about Ukrainian crimes. All of this is obviously a strike undermining credibility of the UN. Mr. President, in conclusion, let me underscore yet once again that we are not against discussing the Ukrainian crisis in the Council. We're against making the tragedy of the Ukrainians who became hostages of the Zelensky regime and his maniacal will to sacrifice them on the altar of geopolitical interests, that it be exploited in the Council for political reasons. It's disrespectful and indifferent to the suffering of thousands of people who are dying and suffering in other areas of the world, and Western members of Security Council are in no hurry to ask for meetings on that. I'd like to believe that reasonable Security Council and international community members with good sense will support us in this. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, allow me to begin by congratulating you and Panama on assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of August.